Lee, the Christian belief that ancient prophecies support the idea and prove that Jesus is the Messiah is coming under attack more and more these days.
Right.
And I know you investigated this as you did the case for the real Jesus. What did you discover in this one?
Well, this is very controversial, as you know. In fact, in the summer of 2006, Jews for Jesus kind of descended upon New York City, proclaiming that the ancient prophecies in the Hebrew Scriptures, or the Old Testament of the Bible as we know it, point toward Jesus as being the Messiah. And it was very controversial. I mean, there was a lot of sparks and a lot of debates over that, and it's still a very big challenge to Christianity being made by people of the Jewish faith and others who say, no, these predictions do not point toward Jesus as being the Messiah. Well, this was an important aspect of my own journey from atheism to faith. When I did my initial investigation and saw these ancient prophecies written hundreds of years before Jesus was born in Bethlehem, and seeing how he fulfilled them against all mathematical odds, that was a significant factor in me concluding that he is the Messiah, the one sent by God to be the Savior of Israel and the world, and that the Bible is supernatural in its origin.
So you found that very convincing.
Very convincing, very powerful, but I wanted to investigate it in light of the current challenges to these messianic prophecies that are coming from all kinds of people. So I went to a PhD in this area, Michael L. Brown, who has written 5 books on the messianic prophecies, is himself someone with a Jewish background who became a believer in Jesus based and later confirming that conversion because of the messianic prophecies. So,
good person to talk to.
Yeah, I mean, very knowledgeable. And I'll tell you what, Mark, I've done a lot of interviews for my books that I've done. And the interview with Michael Brown in The Case for the Real Jesus, where I say, Michael, just take a few minutes, take 20 minutes, take a half an hour, take an hour if you need it. Just spell out for me from A to Z how the ancient prophecies point toward Jesus. And I allowed him to do that before I then cross-examined him and tried to challenge him with the various objections. And Mark, I'm telling you what, he built the most persuasive, the most powerful, the most airtight case for Jesus being the Messiah as predicted by these ancient prophecies I can remember reading in one chapter. I mean, he is just phenomenal in putting forth the evidence.
And distills it all down, and that's in the transcript in the Case for the Real Jesus
Exactly,
chapter.
exactly. It's all there, and you can read it yourself. But one thing I want to highlight, because I just thought it was so fascinating. He said, Lee, here's an interesting thing to keep in mind. And he goes into more detail in the book, and I'll just kind of skim the surface a bit, but it'll give you the gist of it. He says, if you go back to prophecies in Daniel, in Malachi, in Haggai, if you go back there, you see that they predict two things must happen to the temple in Jerusalem before it was destroyed in 70 A.D. One thing is, there must be everlasting atonement for sin. Secondly, there must be a divine visitation. God must visit the temple himself. The temple, as I said, was destroyed in 70 A.D. His conclusion, if Jesus isn't the Messiah, then there is no Messiah to come. The reason is we can't have someone today say, oh, here's the Messiah. And look,
the temple's gone.
Exactly. He fulfills this prediction, and wait a minute. Look at what these ancient prophets said must happen before 70 A.D. There must be everlasting atonement for sin, and there must be a divine visitation to the temple. Wow. Both those must happen at the temple, which was then destroyed. Therefore, it's either Jesus or it's nobody.
Unless there's some other candidate.
From back in that first century who would have had been the divine visitation and also atoned for sin.
There's really no
record of anybody else ever having done that. So it's not like we can still hold out hope that there's going to be a new Messiah who's going to come on the scene.
Because a lot of Jewish people believe that or kind of talk that way.
There are certain sects of Judaism that are still very active in terms of anticipating the Messiah, which is, you look at the ancient commentators in Judaism and so forth. This was a universal belief that the Messiah would come and that we would be able to identify him by his sort of fulfilling that thumbprint, fulfilling these ancient prophecies, that we could tell it's him and nobody else. Well, it's Jesus or it's nobody. And I think that's just one of the really interesting angles that Dr. Brown developed in my interview with him. So I just encourage people who have questions or doubts, who are wondering, could it be true that hundreds of years before Jesus was born in Bethlehem, there are specific predictions that he quite literally fulfilled in his life against all mathematical odds? Nobody else has done it. Could that be true? And Mark, if it's true, what does that tell you about Jesus really being the Messiah, really being the Son of God? It's powerful evidence. It's persuasive evidence. And again, I peppered him with every major objection that is raised by the opponents to this. And time after time, I'll just leave it to the readers. Read it yourself, and you see whether or not he is able to give a cogent and a reasonable response to the toughest and most vociferous challenges being raised by critics.